Hi, I'm Trinity, and I'm an ERP advisor with Striven, and today we're covering vendor management. And in this video, we're going to talk about managing your purchase orders. So we're going to cover your purchase orders list, creating your purchase orders, and then what goes into managing those purchase orders. So let's jump right in and get started. Let's first take a look at our purchase order list by going to Vendors, and then under Purchasing, you'll click on Orders. This is going to take you to your purchase orders list. Now by default it's going to display the ones you've most recently viewed, but by clicking search here you can get your full list of purchase orders. Keep in mind you do have your search filters up top such as PO number, PO name, PO type, PO status, the vendor PO status, the particular vendor you're searching for, and then you can also click this down arrow to expand for additional search filters as well. Something else to keep in mind is you can use this gray arrow here to create saved searches so you can quickly get to those searches on any given day. From the list right here, there's a few actions you could take from the Actions menu here, such as editing the purchase order, changing the fulfillment method, create a bill for the purchase order, or receive items for the purchase order, close the PO, or mark the PO as canceled. You can also see right from here the purchase order name, which includes the date, the vendor that's associated with the purchase order, along with the type, the status, the date, the approval date, the promise date, and your total. Over on the right side, you can see a magnifying glass. Now, if there's a number on that magnifying glass, that indicates to you that the vendor has signed in and has viewed the purchase order in the vendor portal. You also have a notes log and a message log right from the list without having to click into the purchase order. So for example, on the notes log, I can click right here and have a notes log pop up to enter in a note. Simply enter the note, click add, and your note is now time and date stamped along with who entered that note. Similarly, the message log will allow you to create a new message that can be sent to either an internal employee or to the vendor. Notice the V will indicate to me that that is the vendor contact for this particular vendor. With your messages, you can also include attachments. I can hit close to be taken back to the list. Notice that the number updated accordingly to how many notes or messages or how many times the purchase order has been viewed by the vendor. Now let's go ahead and create a new purchase order, and we'll do that by clicking this button right here, Add Purchase Order. From here, the first thing you're going to choose is your type. As you notice, it puts standard PO because in this system, I have the standard PO as my default, but I can override that to a different one if I wish. Once I select the type, the fields may adjust depending on what fields I turned on at my PO type level. So for this one, for example, I have the option to assign a particular vendor, or I can select multiple vendors. By selecting multiple vendors, you're going to be able to search for vendors based on the name, category, and the location. I'm going to go ahead and choose a single vendor for ours. Going down to the next field, you have some important information such as the PO number, a title if you'd like to give it a name, can enter in a promise date, along with the time, requested by put me automatically since I'm logged in and I'm creating this purchase order, but I can override this to another employee if I wish. The vendor contact then allows me to choose who on the vendor side should I be speaking to about this particular purchase order. Moving on along, we have some additional options such as allow the vendor to submit a bill that does not match the PO, and then also allow partial fulfillment by a vendor. So this is going to allow them to submit a bill that doesn't match the PO exactly. So whether it's quantity or the unit cost or something like that, it doesn't have to match for them to submit a bill in the portal for this PO. You can choose also if you just want to make it so allow partial fulfillment, so they can allow to create a bill for each item that they're trying to bill for at any given time. Scrolling up to the top, we have some important information also, such as the PO date and the payment terms. You then have the options to choose your ship to and ship via. Another option is to drop ship this purchase order. So if I have it like this means that I'm purchasing supplies for my company to be sent to my location. Instead, I can choose to drop ship this purchase order, and then it's going to allow me to choose a customer and their location. So the shipment will go directly to my customer and cutting out the middleman, which is me in this situation. You then have the option if this is a one-time purchase order or a recurring purchase order. Something to keep in mind is this is determined based on your type. So if this field is not showing up, you then must have recurring is not available for this PO type. Switching over to recurring allows you to choose your frequency. You can quickly add a new frequency right from here if you haven't done so already. And then you can choose if there's a lead time for the PO, meaning how far in advance should this PO be created for the next batch that's going to go out. So maybe I want to make sure that my vendors are notified at least 15 days ahead of when this PO should actually be created and looked into. And then you're determining if this PO is going to expire. By default, it goes to no expiration, but you can uncheck that and give a specific amount of terms in which this purchase order should be in effect for. Vendor notes allows you to enter in notes that will be visible to the vendor. Keep in mind you can switch to an advanced editor to be much more detailed and much more formatted in your notes. And then we're getting into the item section. So these are the items that you are purchasing from your vendor. For example, maybe I'm purchasing materials. I can then choose to associate that to a customer and an order if I wish as well. I can add a description for more detail, choose my quantity, and the unit cost. If I have class turned on, I can choose the class here, or I can select the class on a per line basis. When I scroll down, I have those terms and conditions that I have associated with my PO type for me to review. I can edit them from right here if my user role allows it. I also have internal notes. Similar to the vendor notes, this is going to allow me to add in formatted notes. The only difference is this will not be visible to the vendor and will only be visible to those signed in looking at this purchase order. The next section you see, we have additional info. With additional info, those are those custom fields that we created at our PO type. Before I create this purchase order, I can choose if I'd like to save it as a template. When I save it as a template, I can give it a name, and then I'm choosing if I want to save the pricing information or just the vendor and shipping information. Now let's just go ahead and give our PO a quick overview so we can make sure everything's correct, and I think we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Create PO. Now since my purchase order was set to be a contract managed purchase order, it's sending me to this page to send it to someone for approval or acceptance. So it chose the contact that I had selected on the purchase order as the vendor contact, and now it's asking me, do I want to send it to him electronically, or do I want to say this is approved written and upload an attachment to prove that, or verbal, which will allow you to indicate that you spoke with the vendor and it has been accepted from your conversation. I'm going to go ahead and use the verbal acceptance for our purposes and hit Accept. So we now have our purchase order that's been created. Notice in the list, I now have this little icon here, which is indicating that this purchase order is set up as a recurring purchase order. So let's go ahead and click back into our purchase order. Right from here, you can see there's a lot of information I can gain, and it's not quite the same view from when I was creating the purchase order. So let's take a look for a moment. Here's all the information, of course, that we filled out, but then over here you have your recurrence information and the acceptance information. So you can see when this was accepted by and who accepted it. I can also remove the recurrence from this PO right from here by clicking this X icon. Moving down further, I can gauge information about the shipping info, the items, and then all the notes that we had entered in. Scrolling to the top, I have some actions under my action menu, such as change fulfillment method, create bill, receive items, close PO, or cancel PO. These are the same item or action items that we had from the list view as well. I can then choose to print my purchase order, look at any attachments or add any attachments, look into any reference material if there have been any associated to the item. You can check into the audit log, which is going to allow me to see who's making changes and when they're making changes. The notes log is going to allow me to enter notes for the purchase order and have a date and time stamped. I can send a message right from the PO as well by clicking the message icon, and then have that stored within here. Any related transactions will be displayed here, so once a bill has been created or the bill has been paid or anything like that, that'll all be in the related transactions for you to see. And then I can add a billing note, which is 500 characters that you can indicate for this PO. Up at the top, I have some additional tabs as well, such as collaboration, which takes me to my hub for the PO, and then assignments, so I can specify who's in charge of this PO. Let's go ahead and click Add. For example, I could say Account Manager, and then choose who that account manager is, who's working on this PO. Then I can indicate if they are the primary or if it should be visible on the portal. As you can see, there's a lot of information you can store within your purchase order right from within Striven.